All right, so check it out. So a little bit of a boxing versus MMA chronicles here. Might do a series out of this. You know the whole boxing and MMA thing. It was big. It was big on YouTube back in around 2008, but it kind of died down over the years. But it kind of surfaces and resurfaces, and with a mixture of interest and a mixture of fights being proposed, like now the whole McGregor and Floyd Mayweather thing being proposed, and for a while, like the Ronda Rousey thing being on the cover of Ring Magazine, and then also in the mix, new fans that come in and all this. But in this episode, right here while I'm live, and again, thanks for those joining me live, and to those that'll be joining me on archive, by the way. But the term "quote unquote" fighter, right? The term fighter. Look, man, there's nothing more annoying to myself, nothing that annoys me more than reading a comment or watching a video or some show, whatever it is, okay? A post, a blog, an article, commentary on TV, what have you. There's nothing more annoying to me than having somebody say, boxers aren't fighters, they're boxers. Excuse me. What? No. It's just when boxing fans are talking about the top 10 fighters, in the sport, why do they say fighters? They should say boxers. What? So I don't know what people don't get about this, and it's always the same thing, right? All they do is use their hands. They don't even throw kicks. They don't grapple on the ground, and they don't do Muay Thai, and they don't do Taekwondo, and it's only one aspect. It's just one aspect of millions of aspects in the martial arts. So they're not fighters. What? Excuse me. What? Okay, so if you're talking about the NFL, right, and you say, who's the MVP, right? Who's the MVP? Most valuable player. And you say the same thing about the NBA. You say the same thing about the NHL, right? Other sports as well. Who's the MVP? Now, you can't say who's the MVP in boxing, can you? See how that doesn't sound right? Oh, the two players are in the ring. They're about to play boxing. You see how that doesn't go? Because they're not players, they're fighters. Now, yes, there are rules in boxing, but boxing is not an aspect of mixed martial arts. It's the biggest piece of bullshit, okay, and misconception I've ever heard. And yes, I've heard even boxing fans say that, and it's not true. Professional boxing is a sport. And yes, it's limited, but it's limited by design. It's designed that way. All right? Certain things were outlawed in boxing on purpose. Wrestling was outlawed from boxing on purpose. It's called the Marquess of Queensberry Rules. Look it up. They don't want people two fighters grappling in the ground. They don't want to see it. Kicking was outlawed in boxing. So yes, I'm well aware that they don't kick in boxing because they outlawed it. It's designed that way. That's how they designed it. In fact, when we're talking about fighting, right, as far as the modern day era, right, the spectacle of it was brought to the forefront by modern prize fighting, which is boxing, right? When you think prize fighting, you think one thing, you think boxing, okay? The spectacle of it. So, sure, instead of a ring, you could do a cage, right? Or whatever it is. And maybe you could have different rules. Maybe in your sport, you're able to kick. You could use knees and MMA, right? Like Muay Thai kickboxing. And maybe in MMA, you could do grappling and jiu-jitsu, right? Maybe you use different types of gloves, right? But it's still the formula that provided a sport in which we call fighters, not players, right? So don't come around and like, oh, you can't say the top 10 fighters. I mean, that's stupid. That's like saying you can't say the top 10 players in football. You know, they're football players, not you know they're that's what they are. They're not players. Really? So that's just the reality of it. Okay, that's it. What's so hard about that, right? Okay, and spare me. Okay, just spare me the. Oh, I don't want. You know what? But boxing, man. You know the reason I like MMA more because in boxing, you know they don't even get to throw knees. Like what? Because they made it illegal, right? Now look, I'm not saying you gotta like boxing, right? If it's not your thing, it's not your thing. Okay, but you're not insulting boxing when you say, "Oh, you don't even throw knees." Like, well, because it's against the rules. That's why. Unless you're Marco Maidana, it's against the rules. All right. They're not even allowed and that's the thing. That's the key word. Is allowed, right? They don't even throw, fucking elbows because yeah, when like it's that's how the sport was designed. All right, and how sweet it is, right? That's right. Since the Marquis of Queensberry rules, look at the success that boxing has consistently had, right? Look how big it was in its heyday. Look at all the remarkable fights, because that's what they're called. They're called fights because they're fighters. They're not called games, okay? Look at all the remarkable fights that boxing has given us for over a century, right? And for decades now that are on film. All the memorable moments. In fact, the limitations are designed into boxing, right? They're not designed to make things easier. In fact, they're designed to make things harder, right? Now, if you study fight or flight, it is human instinct to try to either run away or grab something that is a threat to you, right? Most street fights end up in the ground, right? Most, as I mentioned, most street fights end up in the ground. I was going to make another point, it slipped my mind. But you know where I'm going with this, right? I mean, you get the gist of it. There's nothing natural about boxing. You need to learn how to do it, right? For example, let's say there's two different yards. In one yard, you see two little boys wrestling in the ground, right? They're wrestling, trying to pin the other or something like that, right? Now, technically speaking, can one of them get hurt or, maybe hurt their shoulder, or they land the wrong way, or could something happen? Sure, right? And yes, if it starts getting out of hand, parents could very well say, hey, okay, cut it out. Now, picture another yard, two kids throwing fists at each other, okay? Okay, that's a little more serious, isn't it? You see, throwing fisticuffs needs to be learned. It's a learned process, right? Right? It's you need to learn how to throw a punch, especially a proper punch, right? The techniques of it you need to learn. And while in grappling, you do, of course, need to learn a lot of technique. Grappling is still a lot more natural to us than fisticuffs, right? It's a lot more natural. Our hands are made to grab things. They're not made to punch. Proof? That's why we have to wrap our hands to be in a professional, even amateur boxing fight. And that's why we wear gloves. The gloves are not made to protect the opponent's face. They're made to protect our fist, right? So it's a structured sport, right? It's built that way and it's designed that way, right? And in my opinion, it brings out the best or even the worst in a lot of its athletes. Boxing always reveals something about you. There's very little outs in boxing, right? There's no way out of quitting without obviously quitting. You know, there's no way out of the fact that you need to be on your 2 feet. Now, everything about boxing is designed. The 10 count is designed, right? And the fact that you have to fight on your feet is designed. The fact that you can only use your fists to strike the opponent is designed, right? All that is designed. And it's designed that way not to make things easier, but to make it actually harder on the individual participating in that sport. In this case, boxing, right? So that's it. That's all I really have to say about that, right? Just saw some comments and just when I keep hearing things like, oh, you know, boxing is just one aspect of it. Just that makes no sense to me, right? That makes absolutely no sense. Okay, all MMA does is borrow punching techniques from boxing. That's it. That's all it does. Right? It really takes nothing else from boxing, right? Everything else, like attributes, like reflexes, and those are just that's part of any combat sport. Okay, you know, sure, countering techniques, and you know, it borrows that from boxing, but it's nowhere near the same thing. Okay, it's very little of boxing as a whole is implemented into the, you know, into kickboxing, or much less, okay, the octagon, the UFC. Very little of it. You don't even use the same stance. You don't blade your body the same way. There's nothing similar about it. Some of the most effective boxing techniques, defensive techniques, would not work in MMA. They would not work, right, in a kickboxing or Muay Thai fight. They wouldn't. You can't use the shoulder roll in a Muay Thai fight, okay? Are you kidding me? It's not going to work. Everything about boxing is designed that way. If you, as soon as there's a hold, what does the ref do? They separate it, right? It's an infraction at that point. You separate. So everything about boxing is you need a ref to control what's going on. Because if you remove, here's the difference between MMA and boxing, okay? In MMA, if you were to remove the ref, will there be problems? Yes, right? For example, a fighter has a submission hold on, one guy's tapping out, and then, you know, no one's there to say, okay, break it up. So obviously more arms will be broken, guys will be choked out for too long, all right? In some situations, maybe the fight would be too boring for the fans. It would be in the ground too long or something like that. If somebody's just laying on top of another dude and controlling them. So that obviously there'll be some issues. But in boxing, though, without a ref, I mean, it would be a complete mess, right? The unraveling of it would be almost instant. Almost instant. Without a ref giving the command, okay, break it up, all right, fight, without a referee giving just those two simple commands in boxing, everything would unravel before our very eyes. I mean, dudes would end up in the ground, fall out of the ring. It's crazy, right? There'll be absolutely no order in it. So referee is extremely important. Yes, for obvious reasons that we only notice now because this referees are just part of boxing. So we do know, of course, they're there to stop the fight, or it's kind of like in MMA, right? If a dude's taking too much punishment, it's obviously over. TKO, call the fight, yada yada yada. But in boxing, it's more than that, right? In boxing, a referee is a constant, and in many fights, literally every 30 seconds, needs to put control back and reset that fight, right? It's a constant thing. Now, why am I saying this? The reason I'm saying this, okay, is to just kind of show you that whenever someone says something like, and I hear it a lot, as I mentioned earlier, oh, in boxing, they don't throw knees. In boxing, they don't kick. In boxing, they don't wrestle. In boxing this, in boxing that. Well, you could honestly argue, right, that boxing took most of the things that at the time in the early century or late last century, right? Although we're okay, well, 2 centuries ago, late century. There you go. All right, late 1800s, whatever. It took out the things that people didn't want to see, right? And it forced people to quote unquote box, right? To have a fist fight. That's all people wanted to see, right? Now, in those days, there wasn't a big thing on martial arts, right? Like the implements, like kicking and that came from the Asian cultures, right? China, Japan, a lot shorter men, right? So they incorporated kicking a lot into the fighting styles, right? So there was not, not saying they wouldn't kick, but there was nowhere near the type of technique that was developed by these other cultures, right? So if that had been developed, what do we in essence have kickboxing today? Probably that's very possible, right? Although I'm not sure because of the surfaces where they fought originally, how it all kind of started. I'm not sure if fighting barefooted was going to be a thing, right? But so I mean, we would have to. I mean, at that point, we're going back and saying what ifs, but they basically just took out everything and it just kept the fist fighting aspect to it, right? That's what they did, right? And they did that on purpose. So if you say, well, you can't do this in boxing, you can't do that in boxing, well, yeah, we know that. It's all those things were removed. They got rid of those things. They didn't want it, right? They didn't want those things. It's kind of like you have a car and you want to customize that car, so you remove certain parts of it or whatever, right? I don't know. It's hey man, you got rid of the original exhaust, man. Like well, yeah, I took it out, right? Okay. So anyway, that's that. Peace.